going to learn how to write a paper, and the most important part of writing a paper, the thing that's going to ground your paper, is going to be the thesis statement. And what that is the main argument of your paper. And you might be thinking how you're going to write an entire argument of your paper in one sentence. But that'll be the job of the body paragraphs, which we'll explain later. But take this question as an example. What was the most important cause of World War I? The most important thing to remember about a thesis, or one of the most important things to remember, is to not make it just one simple sentence. It has to explain something. So, for instance, if I were to say the most important cause of World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, then that wouldn't be a good thesis statement, because I'm not explaining why the assassination was important. So in order to modify that, you would say the most important cause was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand because so and so and so and so. And that would make a better thesis. Something else that's really important to remember is that a thesis has to be arguable. So in the example that I just used, it would be a good thesis because I could argue that the cause of World War I wasn't the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. I could argue that that was what eventually the past events led up to, and that was the boiling point that eventually caused the war. But the alliances of European states before that was what was going to eventually lead into World War I. So, like I said, that's some points about making a good thesis, but the body paragraphs are going to be the things that are going to expand on that thesis. And it's hard because you have to essentially in your thesis summarize your entire paper, and that takes a certain amount of creativity and practice, and it'll eventually come once you guys, practice a few times. But what your body paragraphs are doing are expanding on that thesis, and what I like to do is just make a rough outline of your thesis. It doesn't have to be perfect, that's the point of revisions, and go back when you write your body paragraphs and see if the first sentence of each body paragraph connects to the thesis. Now, the little theses in the body paragraphs should all in some way reinforce your thesis. And the evidence in your body paragraphs should connect back to your little thesis. And evidence is usually really annoying for people because they have to go inside of their books and all of their sources and get the evidence. But if you get strong evidence, then it could make the paper much more easier to write because you're grounding that little thesis with the evidence, you're explaining it, and you're writing your paper around the evidence. And then you can get each of those paragraphs and examine them and see if they agree with your thesis. And I like to write this hamburger diagram because I like to say that the thesis and the conclusion, both trying to summarize what your body paragraphs are like the buns of your paper. But the real juicy meat is the body paragraphs, because that's what's explaining the thesis. That's what gives the reader more information about what your main argument is. And, no one really likes to eat hamburger meat without the buns supporting the hamburger. So no one really wants to read a paper with just the body paragraphs and without the thesis and the conclusion supporting that. But you need those buns to do that. And no one wants to just eat buns either. You need some sort of sustenance. So you guys, going back to the thesis, I made an acronym for you guys. You guys can all be ACEs if you remember what that stands for. And A stands for the thesis has to be arguable, it has to be concise, it has to explain something, which is the E, and it has to be sophisticated, which is the S. So, what does the A stand for?
Arguable.
And what does the C stand for?
Concise.
And what does the E stand for?
Explain.
Right. And then the S stands for?
Sophisticated.
Yeah. So, if you just remember those 4 points, then you guys are on the way to writing better